Hi, this is Irving Steel. Welcome to Local Issues. Today we're so lucky we have a special guest. It is Connecticut State Senator Cathy Osten. She's had a dedicated career of public service as first select person in her town, as well as state senator, and also as a veteran serving in the Army. So thank you so much, Senator Osten. It's great to be here with you.
It's nice to see you today on the day after Thanksgiving.
Exactly, and I think part of your district maybe encompasses is right next to a lot of the local tribes here in the state of Connecticut. I know you've done so much for them over the years as well.
Yes, Eastern Connecticut is lucky to have 4 of the state recognized tribes. The other state recognized tribe is on the western part of the state. So that's what we have. We have Mashantucket in Ledyard, primarily in Ledyard, the Eastern Pequots in North Stonington, Mohegan and Montville, and the Golden Hill Pegussets, which have 2 different reservations, one in Colchester and one on a 1/4 of an acre in Trumbull, Connecticut, and then the Scattercoats are in Kent.
That's great, and I know it's kind of this season of being grateful to one another, building this positive community, and you're known fighting for them up in Hartford and helping to, as much as possible, be grateful for what they've always provided for us.
Well, the Native American community and the Native American tribes were here for thousands of years before the colonists ever came to this land, and had thriving communities, not only communities where they lived, but also they had political orientations, they had religious orientations. They were very well established communities before the colonists ever came here.
Do you have any ideas moving forward the next couple of years, things that you would like to do to highlight them or support them even more than you've already been doing?
I have a couple of bills that I'm working on in conjunction with local tribal nations. One is to adopt in Connecticut the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is a federal act, and it provides the Native American community with a say on where children would be adopted out and how they would be taken care of. It's already in law for the federally recognized tribe. It's just not in law for the state recognized tribe, and they've asked for a component of that. And a lot of other states have adopted this Child Welfare Act, some in part and some in whole.
How often do you see that it starts as a federal law and then we bring it down to a state level to localize it like that?
It actually happens both ways. When we talked about cannabis, many states have passed cannabis. Many states have passed gaming rules, but they both have federal implications, and eventually that will probably get passed in some form or fashion on a federal side. It also happens where the federal government passes laws that get adopted by different states.
Okay. And maybe we could take it one step back a little bit, that you kind of grew up in the area, you went to local college.
Yep.
And then from there you kind of had this urge to serve the country. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, actually, I joined the military when I was 3 days after I turned 18. So I didn't go to college until after I came back.
Oh, okay.
So I came back to Connecticut after I'd served for slightly more than 4 years. I went in active duty when I first started because the class that I needed to take, the MOS, didn't start until later in the next year. So I joined in September. I went active duty in February of the following year, and then was in more than 4 years on active duty.
And I believe you were all over the world too, that you had some different assignments.
I don't know that I would say all over the world. I actually got to see some of our country. I had never been at that point in California. I went to California, and then I went to South Carolina, California, and then Texas, and then I went overseas to Misawa, Japan.
Okay. And I think partially some of that might be why you're so dedicated as well for serving and helping veterans at the Capitol as well. It seems like that's an emphasis for you as well.
It is. I'm actually working right now with a young woman who had a family member who was killed in the Gulf War, and the General Assembly does not have a Gulf War memorial. And I'm working on establishing a Gulf War memorial for the 7 Connecticut residents who were killed in action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. They've done so much for our country. You've done so much for our country, and I think they come back, they have different challenges, and trying to acclimate back to their own country. The least we could do, I think, is what you do at the Capitol, is support them, provide opportunities for them, all of that. So thanks for all that you do for them.
Thank you. Veterans are important. In Eastern Connecticut, we have the largest number of veterans. It only makes sense because many veterans stay here and work at the subbase, were at the subbase and then work at Electric Boat. They stay here because we have good benefits for veterans also. You can go to college for free all the way up to the point of getting your doctorate. You can also, if you're a retired military person, not a one-termer like me, but a retired military person. And we also don't charge them income tax on their pensions and a lot of other benefits too, but those are 2 big things that people are interested in working on. So they like here. They lived here. In many cases, they've lived here for years and years and just want to stay here. Their families acclimated to the environment.
Mm-hmm. And it's huge that if you help them with job opportunities, housing, that we have the nuclear power plant nearby, the subbase, that they can potentially use a lot of these skills that they honed over the years in
Correct.
the civilian world.
Correct. And this year, I set up some tours and meetings with many of our largest employers with the Southeastern delegation, and we visited the Coast Guard Academy, which has 500 local jobs here, permanent jobs here. The subbase, which has 21,000 jobs. The Dominion and Electric Boat, both increasing the number of jobs that they have here. And then we went to the 2 tribal nations that are the federally recognized to talk about tribal issues that we may want to look at in the next legislative session. And we have one more place we have to go, and that's Pfizer, because it's another large employer, and we're hoping to get there before the start of session.
That's great. And I imagine, too, as the tribal nations continue to diversify outside of the traditional, potentially gambling, that there will probably be more and more opportunities in the region.
Well, the 2 tribal nations, through the business arm of the tribal nations, they happen to be predominantly in the gaming and hospitality industry, are 2 of the largest employers in the state. Having right now probably about 8,000 workers between the 2 of them. They were up to 12,000 workers pre-pandemic, and we're hoping that they can get back up to that level. Electric Boat, they're going to be hiring some 18,000 people in the next few years. 18,000. And part of that is because they have a graying of the industry, and they're going to have a number of people retire. But a lot of that has to do with the Columbia class subs that are being built there. They're also doing some of the work relative to the renovation and repair of subs. So that is keeping them very busy. And they have many of the engineers that graduate from UConn and our other state universities are actually getting jobs at Electric Boat, and that's good for our state, very good for our state.
It's phenomenal. I mean, you think the economic impact from all these jobs, 18,000 here and maybe a few more thousand there, that has a ripple effect out of everything in our community, so it's great.
Correct, and it's one of the things that when we were talking with Electric Boat, the things that they brought up were childcare. That was one of their number 1 issues. They wanted to make sure that there was enough childcare. because they have a number of young people that are working there now, they have a number of young people that are getting married and having children. And they want their children in good childcare so they can transition from the home to a childcare institution and then ultimately into school. But they want to make sure that they have good childcare. Another thing was housing. We're going to need more housing in eastern Connecticut to deal with the number of people that are going to be working. And the workload at Electric Boat is going to be decades in the making. It's not a blip on the screen. It's decades into making. Dominion itself pays for a program at Three Rivers, and that program is an associate's degree in nuclear engineering. And they pay for the program, they pay for the young people to attend that program, and then they hire them afterwards.
Wow.
So, and those are people that are going to start jobs that are at the $60,000 range. It's a great program, and we're ever so grateful for Dominion to pay for that program. They do a lot of other community things too, as does Electric Boat, as does the sub base and the Coast Guard Academy. They are all great. Not only are they great employers, they're great community partners and have done a lot of work relative to that. That's the same thing with the two tribal nations. They're two of the largest businesses in the state. They're the two largest minority-owned businesses. They do a lot in and around the region relative to helping out nonprofit institutions, helping out with food banks, helping out with a lot of different things. So, and a lot of people that work there have worked there the whole time that the two gaming institutions have been around.
Yeah, the longevity there is incredible. I think it's millions and millions of dollars that they send back to the community. It's remarkable.
It is, and that's not counting the amount of money that goes into the state government. So
that's amazing. And so you were in the Army for just over 4 years, and you came back, finished your degree, and then could you share after that?
Oh, I did a lot of different kinds of things, but my parents owned a family restaurant, and I have about 40 first cousins, give or take, and many of them worked for my parents. Another arm of the family worked at A&P, the grocery store, and their family stayed in that grocery store business. And so I went to work for the family business for a while after I came back out. I also worked at a number of factories. I worked at Lear, Gilman Brothers. I worked at UPS, unloading tractor trailer trucks and loading the cars up. And then I worked for the Norwich Bulletin. I did a number of different jobs, and then I went to work for the Department of Correction, where I worked 21 years there. That's kind of sort of what I've done. I also worked for a private correctional facility in Rhode Island, which overlapped with my time in the Department of Correction.
That must have been amazing. Over 20 years at the Department of Corrections, probably a lot of change over that time.
There was a lot of change. And one of my experiences there was after we closed our state hospitals, the number of people that were chronically mentally ill that were coming into the Department of Correction increased. So I've been asking the Judicial Committee in the legislature to review this issue. Ultimately, I got the Sentencing Commission to review this, and the Sentencing Commission did just a thumbnail review of the number of people that were chronically mentally ill in our prison system, and about 80% of female inmates were considered chronically mentally ill, and it said 28%, about 30% of male inmates, and this was done based on self diagnosis, so there needs to be a lot more work to make sure that we're really identifying people and what are we providing them for services pre their incarceration, but also post-incarceration, so we don't have a large recidivism rate. Generally speaking, they're a group that has a large recidivism rate, just because if they're not given the correct services when they discharge, then they're more apt to come back again. That's also the reason why the state of Connecticut needs to put training dollars into social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists. I don't think we have enough in the country, but we certainly don't have enough here in Connecticut.
Yeah, definitely. And you think potentially a lot of these people, they try and self-medicate or these different things with illegal substances, and then they just go right back into the jail. So
some people self-medicate, not everybody. Mm-hmm. Some people have conditions, like they might be someone who's a schizophrenic. They may never self-medicate. They may, but they may not. And so oftentimes we mix the two together, someone who has a mental health condition or behavioral health condition and someone who has a substance abuse. And sometimes they're dually diagnosed with both of those, but not always. And the state hospitals used to help out, and I'm not saying we should go back to the state psychiatric institutions, but we need to do what we had promised back then when we closed the state hospitals, that we would provide the services for people. And part of the budget that we put in had increases in aid for those who give behavioral health services to people. So I'm waiting to see what those contracts look like, because the administration hasn't yet finished putting those contracts out. And I think that that's important for us to recognize, what do we have now, how is it going to help out, and where do we need to put more dollars in?
Definitely, and potentially with the American Rescue Funds, there might be funding there that we could use. And just as you said, with social workers, there's a huge need just for more trained professionals.
Correct. And our schools are also asking for more social workers. Mm-hmm. So that is, this is something that we need to do.
Mm-hmm. And what have you seen, or what did you work on potentially with people who were in correctional facilities and helping them with employment or find different jobs or companies once they get out?
There were 3 programs that we put some additional dollars in for that came out of the Commerce Committee to help out people who are incarcerated when they discharge. We also did put in, because we recognize the job of correctional officers is a very difficult job, and many of the people that work there have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. Certainly not everyone, but the complications of the job and the pressure that it puts on families sometimes leads to them needing some additional help. And we were able to fund a program that's been working on the mental health of the workers that go into our correctional facilities every day. And we put dollars in to help out the inmate population when they leave the correctional facilities, and 95% of the people that are incarcerated are going to leave. And we want to make sure that they get out and become productive citizens, that they can get a job that will support them and their families. And so that's some of the training that we're looking at, manufacturing training in particular, and some construction trades and other things relative to that.
That's great, and I really appreciate how you put the emphasis on kind of the holistic element of healthcare, that it's not just physical health, it's mental health, spiritual health. We need to help these people potentially with PTSD or people leaving jail.
Right.
It's so vital.
Right. Post-traumatic stress is something I think that we should cover for all workers, and I think that we need to pay attention to the trauma that people suffer. That's why we need more social workers. Trauma, if we deal with trauma when it happens, it can potentially stop people from suffering the consequences of that later in life. And it provides for a more balanced look at an individual. So I've always been someone that feels that we cannot ignore mental health. It took years for us to recognize that cardiac health or hypertension was something that we needed to take care of. Diabetes, they are commonly talked about diseases, but back a few decades ago, we didn't talk about these things. We kind of ignored them, and now we're recognizing that we can put people on a path towards better physical health. There are ways to put people on a path for better mental health, and that's something that we need to continue to work on.
And especially in America, when we look, and something like 20% of our GDP now is going towards healthcare, and this could potentially be a way where we provide preventative services to
Correct.
reduce these costs.
Correct. Preventative services are really the way to go, but we also have to recognize that preventative services extend to the neck up, all things, so that we're looking at the brain and recognizing that there are sometimes physical components to mental health, in particular relative to trauma.
And it feels like, at least with COVID, potentially one very, very small positive element. COVID's been terrible, but in the news and media, it feels like there's more emphasis on at least students and mental health. Have you seen that too?
Well, I think that it certainly, COVID certainly laid bare the fact that we have another whole arm of health care that is not being addressed, and that is the mental health or behavioral health components of things.
Do you have any ideas potentially for the next session, or any bills that you're currently working on to push that ahead a little bit?
Well, I'm looking at to make sure that we have all the dollars necessary. The administration is responsible to put contracts out. Not all those contracts have been put out yet. So if we put those contracts out now, it would lead us to a better understanding of the cost. We have an idea of the cost. We put in dollars relative to behavioral health. The administration has found some other federal dollars and are looking to expand mental health, which would mean that we would have to have the state component in there. We're also looking at some of our educational supports to make sure that we have enough dollars in for the educational supports to provide a balanced across the board to make sure that our vocational agricultural and our vocational technical schools and our charter schools are funded at the same level as our traditional public schools, because it's clear that we have changed what we would anticipate as needed educational experiences. We also have magnet schools, which is another whole funding animal in and of itself, and we're looking at that. But we have some task forces that we put in to look at these issues to make sure that we were providing all of the resources.
That's great. So not only do you do a lot of work for veterans, for healthcare, for correctional facilities, healthcare, and also you've shown a lot of leadership for workers in general over your career as well.
Well, I think that well, certainly they're the backbone of what they're the funding of our local communities, and I think that we need to make sure that we're paying workers at a level that, I had a discussion with, I'm on the library board in the town of Sprague, and we were talking about our workers, trying to convince the new administration that those workers should be paid the same level as other workers. I think that libraries are an important component of our local communities, and so we're working on that too. So from a local level to a state level, I'm also very excited. I just want to put a big plug in for the infrastructure bill that Congress just passed. I think that is extremely important for us to get projects out to bid now, so that we're ready to do some of the construction work now, so that we can put shovels in the ground starting in April or May next year, so we can actually get some of this work done.
That's phenomenal. Do you have any sense of idea what kind of projects or how large this impact could be for Eastern Connecticut?
Well, I sent a letter along with a couple of other of my colleagues to Congressman Courtney and Congresswoman DeLauro about infrastructure, and I had about $400 million worth of projects in Eastern Connecticut. Many of them in Norwich, but a lot of them revolved around water and sewer, bridge repairs. We have 300 some bridges in Connecticut that need to be repaired.
Wow.
I really want to see the Gold Star Bridge completely rehabilitated. They're saying that should take about 10 years. I think that we should use some of the infrastructure dollars to work on that. When you fix a water line or a sewer line, those lines, those are 100-year infrastructure pieces. We should do anything that has to do with water and sewer. Many roads need to be rehabilitated with better drainage. Our storms are not the same as they were, and if we have better drainage, it not only impacts our road infrastructure, it impacts our environment by appropriately handling the water that is going, wherever it happens to be going into, but we want to make sure that we're doing that. And so these are things that we should do right now, and potentially I can see some big changes happening in Eastern Connecticut.
Yeah, it can have huge impact. And I teach at a local college here, and one thing that we say for leadership is kind of believing in your ideas, having that divergent thinking sometimes. And I believe some of that has been your case for many things, but also cannabis recently.
Yeah. Well, I've always thought that we should, I have said all along that should we legalize marijuana, that I would vote for it. Most recently, there was a case where fentanyl was put into a distribution of marijuana that was done on an illegal basis. For me, it's never been about the money. It's been about having a regulated substance that you can trust. It's the same thing that we did with many, with tobacco, with alcohol, and some other things that, I think that that's something that we should do. And I saw that a lot of people were hurt by our policies on drugs, by the number of young people that ended up incarcerated and had essentially their lives ruined for no good reason. And that's something that I think that we have to do. And so it's never been about the dollars for me. It's been about having a regulated system that we could look at. So.
And before, we just have about a minute left, that you're very active on different platforms, social media, things like that. If people want to follow you or find out more about your hard work for the community, how could they do that?
Well, I'm on both Twitter and on Facebook. I have a couple of different pages on Facebook. And I also, I'm on Instagram. I'm not as good on Instagram as some other people, so I'm not really positive about that one. And LinkedIn, I have a page. I don't really keep that one up, but both Facebook and Twitter, I have very active accounts.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
No, I just want to thank everybody for listening in today. I think talking about local issues is extremely important. If they have a question, they can always call my office, 860-240-0579, and I'll get back to them.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your public service all these years. We're very grateful.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.